Good morning. I had a download in a dream about Saturn and wanted to share it. Um, so, in the dream, an astrologer who I respect, Jessica Lanyadoo, weird to give her dream credit because it probably wasn't her, give it anyways. She was telling me in the dream that Saturn is all about experimentation, not because Saturn is inherently like experimental. I would, attribute other signs with that more, but because the process of gaining wisdom with Saturn requires trial and error and experience. So it's experimental in the way that we try to get a better sense of our responsibilities, our boundaries, our limits, our personal rules, kind of the way that we shape and uphold our own reality. So I'll start with Pisces because that is the Saturn placement that's in the sky right now, and might be useful to those with Saturn and Pisces at the moment who are going through their Saturn return. So, or their second Saturn return, or their third Saturn return. But essentially, the way that Saturn and Pisces experimentation works is that with Pisces, we're talking about stuff that's so nebulous. There's like downloads and intuitive components and like wisdom that's non-physical, either through like guides or inspiration or, reading a book and feeling really inspired or, absorbing someone's philosophical teachings and being like, yeah, like I connect with that. But then Saturn asks you to put it to the test. So you take in, whatever wisdom, wherever you get it, and you put it to the test, you make it physical and see if it works for you. Because, we all have diverse experiences, so the only way to take that Pisces wisdom is to, the only way to make it Saturn is to apply it and kind of see how it goes. So the benefit of this is that all of your earned wisdom then is something that you've tried and tested yourself. And so it makes you have, over time, right? It makes you have that Saturn in Pisces, like wise, grounded, spiritual elder kind of presence because you've tried things and you've earned it. The consequence with Saturn in Pisces, in my opinion, for not trying to make things physical or put them to the test is that then everything that remains a theory, and the scientist in me just can't have that, but everything remains a theory, and you find your mind and imagination kind of drifting towards those non-physical ideas. This is so nebulous, but it's Neptune. I mean, it's Pisces, so that's how it works. But yeah, it kind of promotes like dissociation and daydreaming, which like, that's fine. But with Saturn, the idea is you want to be able to root into it and make it physical. So you don't want it to stay up in like, you don't want it to stay in your crown area or like hovering above you. You want to bring those ideas through, or at least the ones that you feel like trying, right? Okay, so that's Pisces. I should do them backwards. Okay, we'll do them backwards. So then by the same logic, Saturn in Aquarius is about taking the Aquarian things and making them physical. So this is more about putting into practice your ideals around social unity and justice and liberation. And so it requires that everyone with Saturn in Aquarius applies their beliefs that we all belong. And so that means that they have to do the work of putting that to the test for themselves. So wearing the clothes that make them feel liberated and make them feel like themselves and make them feel individual. Doing their hair, decorating their bodies, piercings, tattoos, or not doing that. Whatever gets you to the end goal of like, okay, this is me, this is how I show up. To do the work of societal liberation, and it takes that rebelliousness of Aquarius and that like desire for freedom and takes it from a place of just rebellion and resistance around what is, and asks those Saturn folks to put into practice what they would like to see for the world and see if that works. And see if it works now in this time and age, using the wisdom of people who've come before and workshopping it. And of course, not keeping these ideas themselves, gathering with other people, sharing what they've learned, those sorts of things. The consequence for not doing that is that you're not practicing what you preach, so then it just kind of makes you look immature. And I think that's true with all Saturn placements. If you don't do the work, then you're kind of just like on your soapbox, but you haven't walked the walk. Yeah. So Saturn in Capricorn, folks. I feel for you guys only because you either had one of two things happen for those who have, what years were you born between? I want to say it was like 1989 to like 1991, I think, are the Saturn in Capricorn folks who went through their Saturn returns as COVID was going on, in the early days of it, I mean. But I feel for you all because Pluto is also going through Capricorn, for a bunch of years. So either Pluto came through and wrecked some shit, and then Saturn was like, build it back up, like, do the work, go. Or if you have a later degree Saturn in Capricorn, you were like, okay, I did my Saturn return. Good job to me, I learned something. And then Pluto came through and was like, redesign it, kind of blew it up. So the upheaval for both of those cohorts of Saturn and Capricorn, I feel for you guys. So that's why I was laughing. I'm so compassionate. Saturn and Capricorn, sorry. These folks were talking about Capricorn things, so we're talking about structures and traditions and all of the things that are ruled by Saturn, right? Because Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, and making lasting legacy kind of stuff. So there's an intense desire to build upon the ideals of your parents, of your family members, those who came before you, of your own ideals, of those people you look up to, the Capricornian people in your life who have built cool things. And it's this process of deciding if that works for you or not, and then kind of testing it. So your parents say, this works this way, this is how the world works. And you're like, okay, let me test that and see if that's true for me. So if you test it, then you get to figure out if that's true or not. And the cool part is then you're freed from those expectations if it doesn't work for you. Because something that pisses me off is that, this just shows I haven't been through my Saturn return, right? Something that pisses me off is that we'll get advice from previous generations, and I'm like, great, that worked for you. I don't know if it works for me, and I don't know if it applies for the times that we're in, because things get more and more complicated, and the world looks different, and the landscape is different every time, and there are also more people. So just because it worked for your generation doesn't mean that it's like a rule for the end of time, So anyway, the consequence of not trying out those things for yourself and figuring out if they're true for you is that, again, you just have the normal Saturn consequence of seeming immature. And the person who popped into my head for some reason is Draco Malfoy. Like, my father will hear about this. There's something about not trying those ideals where it just makes you look foolish. Not that you should be worried about that. Who cares? But that the idea of not putting those things into practice yourself, it just kind of diminishes the value of it. It's like, oh, you're just like, parroting what people have told you before, and it doesn't have the same value as if you've lived through it and struggled with those things, Okay. Saturn in Sagittarius. This one, to me, and maybe this is influenced, it is influenced by people I know, but this one to me can take a couple of different forms. Sagittarius has, the desire to expand and learn and travel and take in all of this like philosophy and religion and laws, philosophical laws for how we should do things, and it puts those things to the test. So it could be, people before you have told you that, like, oh, they've used their prejudice and been like, oh, this country is dangerous, or this idea is dangerous, and here's the scope of what you can handle and what you can't. And it's about testing those things for yourself. So doing the travel, learning from other people, and not just taking the book approach and not just taking people's word for things, like trying it out yourself and learning from, like kind of going to the roots of cultures or religions that you're interested in, or philosophies. Like, go to the place, go to the heart of it, find out for yourself, experience it. And I think for a lot of people, there's like an element of unpacking parental philosophy and religion and principles, and kind of like, I don't know, testing those against what your own values are and making sure that they're consistent with what you've learned. So it's an expansive kind of Saturn. Not shocking, that's Sagittarius, but it asks that people kind of check their prejudice and become more worldly. The consequence for not is that, maybe the consequence for all of them is that you just sound silly and the information isn't rooted. I think that's what we'll go with. But it can get a little soapboxy without having experienced anything. Yeah. Saturn in Scorpio. So for this one, we're talking about Scorpio energy, which is all about, honestly, going to the roots of things, but it's about transformation and kind of churning over things. It's about finding the richness and uncovering like truths, but it's like doing it in a way where you're pulling up a bunch of stuff to be examined and kind of like filtering through the muck to find out, I don't know, the roots of where power dynamics come from, or getting a more psychological understanding of yourself, going to therapy, those sorts of things. It's also about examining fears, but that's just because of the Pluto influence with Scorpio. So I think for Saturn and Scorpio people, the experimentation is about kind of doing their own shadow work. And I think what can happen for those folks, and this is also just universally true, is that our parents can like self-pathologize or tell you like, oh, well, this is just kind of how it is, and this is just how it is in our family, and like, here's the mental stuff that that's not how I want to say it. Here's mental health stuff that you've inherited from your family. Here's like trauma stuff that you've inherited. Or they don't tell you any of those things and are like, we're perfect and it's fine. And Saturn in Scorpio's job is to investigate those things and kind of do this somatic work of, getting more comfy in their bodies and getting a more solid understanding of their own fears and dealings with power and their own psychology and relationship with death, with Scorpio. But it just makes them more grounded and holding their own power, and it makes them understand themselves better. If you don't, you kind of are just following the carbon copy from your parents' generation, and that's fine. It just doesn't it doesn't make it your own, and it won't make you understand yourself very well.